You'd mentioned about a colleague telling you, you should stop talking about EDA. People had been talking and they were worried about what you were thinking. And then you mentioned this one quote and you said, fear leads to censorship.
But do you explore under what conditions or designs EDI has succeeded?
I think I need to explain something here, and I think it's important to talk about what's called the Mott and Bailey tactic. So with respect to EDI, we see a lot of this.
I'm going to start with a direct quote between you and a conversation with a colleague. You should stop talking about EDI, my colleague suggested to me over lunch. You've got a family, he said. Think about your kids. I'll admit that my heart rate increased because it sounded a lot like, nice family you got there. Would be a shame if you were no longer able to provide for them.
Would you say that the application of EDI policy has led to less qualified people hired, producing less good research?
That would be a logical conclusion.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you. This year, my long-held NSERC Discovery Grant was not renewed. Not for any scientific reason, but for a political one. Specifically, I was unable to profess sufficiently enthusiastic support for the official state ideology of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, which one now must do to receive Tri-Council funding. Essentially, scientists must say how they will recruit diverse people and identify and address systemic barriers to inclusion. I attempted to meet these requirements by arguing that because EDI requires racial discrimination and speech restrictions, policies opposed by most Canadians, EDI is itself a barrier to inclusion. To overcome this barrier, I proposed ensuring that EDI critics feel included and that we prioritize a culture of free speech and viewpoint diversity, without which science simply cannot flourish. The NSERC Evaluation Committee obviously did not buy my interpretation of EDI. Unhelpfully, my rejection was accompanied only by the vague scolding that I did not, quote, describe an approach to recruit a diverse HQP and provide an inclusive training environment, unquote. While friendly enough, NSERC program officers couldn't tell me what this meant. Luckily, a senior administrator at my university who speaks Tri-Council could decipher this message. He relayed to me that, while I don't have to sincerely support EDI, I most certainly must give the impression that I do. Just say what needs to be said and get your money. To attract a diverse array of candidates, for example, I was told it's not enough to assume that those interested in my work will seek me out with a simple email. Instead, I must boldly proclaim my commitment to finding diversity at intersectional sanctuaries like the Campus Rainbow Centre. This is puzzling advice, not least because of those struggling to find people on the internet. It seems unlikely that foremost among them are members of the gay community. Now, senior administrators are very attuned to the linguistic practices surrounding the acquisition of public funds. So this advice rings broadly true. The Tri-Council aims to tell us what to think and what to say. For skeptics, let me quote from the EDI Best Practices Guide. It says, systemic barriers may be unseen to those who do not experience them, but nonetheless, all individuals must recognize that systemic barriers exist. It would be charitable to describe this as pseudoscience. Reputable scientists require experimental results to be universally observable and replicable by people of other languages and cultures centuries into the future. Claiming that knowledge is invisible to some people, based on skin color, for example, is anti-science. In other words, the government requires scientists to affirm the existence of phenomena that are not empirically verifiable. To invoke Paul McCartney, it's beginning to feel like we're back in the USSR. So how has this nonsense so completely permeated Canada's research ecosystem? Well, after a few cancellations, people fall in line. Fear leads to self-censorship, and open, vigorous debate fizzles out. I've tried to discuss EDI on campus a few times with the following results. First, I was told that EDI is not debatable by two different administrators on two separate occasions. Second, I was kindly advised to stop talking about EDI because I have a family. I should think about my kids, I was told. It made me wonder, do I work for a public university or Tony Soprano. To summarize, tri-council EDI requirements are compelled political speech, and we find ourselves here because many have allowed themselves to be silenced. I will leave you with two broad recommendations that I believe are critical for restoring the integrity of science. The first is corrective, the second preventative. As a corrective measure, depoliticize science funding. This includes, among other things, removing EDI requirements. As a preventative measure, entrench a culture of free speech, which is the best defense against bad ideas. All recent manias, from gender medicine to EDI, could have been avoided had they been openly debated from the start. I propose an Office of Devil's Advocacy to fund evidence-based arguments against emerging scientific fads. This builds in viewpoint diversity and ensures that counterpoints are officially aired. Everyone benefits as ideas are defended, sharpened, and refined. I am happy to expand on any of these points during questions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be heard.
For the first round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Horstman, you authored a chapter in the book, The War on Science. And within that chapter, you mentioned we need to renormalize a culture of liberal science on campus, especially with respect to radical new ideas like equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI. You make the statement in that chapter, universities, the institutions that should be at the very heart of liberal science, are increasingly ignoring these rules. In your testimony today, you talk about your recommendations, and two of them about how we can depoliticize science funding and entrenching a culture of free speech. I think that touches upon diversity viewpoints. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I think with respect to some of the problems with renormalizing a culture of free exchange of ideas, in that case I was referring to probably Jonathan Rauch's rules for liberal science. And that is, the first rule is that knowledge is provisional. No one has the final say. Okay, so that's very important. In his first book, he articulated or uses an example estimates for the size of the universe and how that's changed year by year, century after century. At any time, can you be sure you've got the right answer? Of course not. Everything is open, everything is contestable. Nothing is beyond question or debate. And as I mentioned, that rule is being broken because people will say such and such a controversial topic is beyond debate. The other rule is that no one has personal authority. So no one can use their personal or identity status to wall off knowledge from other people. It's universal. So that means, as I mentioned in my testimony today, that if you do an experiment right, it should be replicable by someone who speaks a different language on a different continent centuries in the future. And that, too, is being attacked in the academy through things like you have to acknowledge lived experience of that particular person or group. It's inaccessible to others. So that's defying the universal principle of knowledge and of science. You'll also hear things like an ethnic way of knowing, right? That, again, is defying the universal principle that knowledge is accessible to everyone, regardless of identity. It exists in the ether, and it's universal.
It was interesting. In your opening statement, you'd mentioned about a colleague telling you, you should stop talking about EDA. People had been talking and they were worried about what you were thinking. And then you mentioned this one quote, and you said, fear leads to censorship. And within your chapter in the book, you said, a scientist at another Canadian university told you, I have made my peace with EDI. I will lie about my most deeply held beliefs or convictions on paper in order to get funding. So in a sense, you're almost having a bit of academic dishonesty simply to avoid that notion of censorship to get the funding. And I don't think that serves the institution well.
Doesn't serve anyone well. If we are now admitting openly, well, maybe not openly, but in private at least, that many of us are just saying what we know needs to be said, even if it deeply offends our cherished beliefs and values of things like openness, the universality of knowledge, things that are deeply offensive to us. If people are saying, I'm going to just say things that counter that in order to get funding so I can continue my research program, this is very dangerous, and I think because we have to acknowledge what that might do to an individual person who accepts that they've lied, right? I think it diminishes their soul in a way, right? They're now weaker and less able to stand up and resist further incursions. I mean, when you start lying, when do you stop?
Well, to your point, and when you are honest and do applications, you mentioned in that chapter in the book of Dr. Kembam-Patti having a grant application rejected because you talked about meritocratic principles in hiring. I was just wondering if you could expand on that, Doctor.
It would be my pleasure. In an NFRF competition in 2019, it was the first time I had to write a DEI section, and the concept of people not having all the same resources or even experiencing racism and sexism or atheism is not only not distant from me, I've experienced all these things ad nauseum, but that means I don't want that idea to propagate in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not going to judge a woman or a man or a gay or a black or a straight by anything other than, can you do quantum mechanics? Well, I said, great. I welcome everyone into my group. All you have to do is geeky enough to want to do the quantum mechanics and build lasers. I mean, I have 5 women in my group of 15 men, and they're all geeky women physicists too, just like the geeky men. We're all the same.
And what happened was?
That
application was rejected.
The application never made it to scientific review because it was purely rejected on EDI grounds. And I simply said, I've experienced more than you have probably. Having said that, that's why I believe in merit, fairness, and equality.
Thank you.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Rana for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, all the participants. My question is to you, Dr. Horstman. I would love to mention your recent article, Woke Ramit Kingdom, Canada Doubles Down on EDI, as you mentioned. So my question is, you argue many EDI practices are ineffective or even harmful. But do you explore under what conditions or designs EDI has succeeded?
Well, what I think I need to explain something here, and I think it's important to talk about what's called the Mott and Bailey tactic. So with respect to EDI, we see a lot of this. So as I've experienced and demonstrated today, EDI generally involves sweeping programs of racial discrimination, compelled speech, censorship, but when people start to complain about it and it comes under fire, what happens is that the EDI advocates retreat to positions like, well, it's just about making sure that we have good experimental design so that seatbelts are designed accounting for women. That's got nothing to do with EDI. That has long been good experimental practice, and that's why you just have to have lots of rigor, review, contestation of different ideas so that you can seek out and find error and remove it. So I don't know of any cases where EDI has been beneficial.
Over these 2 past committee meetings, we have heard from various professionals and scholars of how beneficial EDI has been at ensuring all Canadians are on a fair playing field. Throughout your time in academia, what possible negative consequences over EDI have you witnessed?
Negative consequences of EDI have been legion. I mean, I expressed some of them there, but I can provide more. For example, my department was awarded what's called an Inclusive Excellence Program. Now, this is an Orwellian term that just means we're going to restrict it to certain limited groups. It's not including, it's excluding, and you're limiting the applicant pool severely. So here's what happened. Our university decided that in the wake of 2021, they wanted to hire 6 black scholars and 6 Indigenous scholars. Our department was awarded one of the positions for an Indigenous scholar. Upon hearing this, a colleague of mine from outside the department related to me that they knew of a really good postdoc in the United States who was black, and it would be really good to get this person to apply. Of course, I had to tell my colleague that this person is excluded because they have the wrong skin color. This is the in and out daily experience of EDI policies. They're discriminatory, exclusionary, and they are, I see no good in them. They're dark.
Hi, thank you for being here today. Dr. Horstman, you come from Laurier, right in my community. I'm MP for Kitchener Centre. Welcome, thank you. My question will be directed to you, one of. I'm going to start with a direct quote between you and a conversation with a colleague. You should stop talking about EDI, my colleague suggested to me over lunch. You've got a family, he said. Think about your kids, he implored. I'll admit that my heart rate increased because it sounded a lot like, nice family you got there. Would be a shame if you were no longer able to provide for them. I've got to tell you, my heart is racing right now at the mere thought of having to choose free speech over providing for my family. That, coupled with DEI incentives, foster an administrative culture that provides securing political aligned funding over protecting academic and open inquiry. You believe that science thrives when scientists are guided by evidence and motivated by curiosity. I ask, is the Canadian scientific community thriving right now with the personal and political pressure to conform to these ideologies instead of fostering true democratic free speech in academia?
Well, thank you for the question. No, I don't think that science is thriving in Canada, and now it's not just EDI initiatives. I think it's politicization more broadly that is hindering it. As I said, I think if you're not free to speak, that has an impact that emanates out into the culture of science, so that people just tend to be hesitant. It makes you diminished. It makes you less experimental. You don't take risks. You just sit back and become small and just do some derivative work so you don't make waves, and hopefully you can just kind of be relatively, keep your head down and get through. That's increasingly the culture of science in Canada.
I agree, thank you. That's a great segue actually into Professor Kamambadi. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Excellent. You're an award-winning Canadian scientist, and you've been refused 2 federal government grants on the grounds of lack of diversity. Your work explores cutting-edge laser science, a field that spans from everything from telecom to medicine, and you believe Canada could actually become a world leader in that field. But your applications for the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, NSERC, was turned down because the council said, in quotes, the equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in the application were deemed insufficient. When we're not focused on research itself, cutting-edge research like you're working on in your facility, that Canada can actually become the lead on, and we focus instead on DEI, what's the economic impact of that, especially in tech hubs where I'm from, like Kitchener?
It's a wonderful question. I thank you for asking that. I'm very thrilled you asked that, because there's often a misconception that you fund science like you fund education, and it makes people happy and nice and good things. You know, everyone feels nice about themselves, like kindergarten. No. Science is the driver of economic progress, first and foremost. Absolutely true. There is no economic progress without science. Otherwise, we're just digging for gold or coal. That's why we can have quantum computers. That's why we have encryption. That's why we have MRI machines. Is because of science. So if we stop this progress by giving resources to people who are less qualified, and it is absolutely necessarily the case that when you use DEI, you are discriminating. And you're discriminating and following in the footsteps of intellectual racism from Britain in the 1880s, which was actually very popular. And in anthropology, perhaps my colleague could know, you could get tenure in racism. It was a thing. I just got tenure in racism. Woo! So that now we have, I just got tenure in DEI. It's the same thing. Like in communism, they politicized science to such an extent that the Ukrainians starved and cannibalized each other because they didn't believe in capitalist genetics. So the opportunity cost is astronomical, and Canada was a leader. One of my heroes here is Dwayne Miller at Toronto, and he was a leader, and he's retirement age almost. He'll be angry if I say that, but I want to follow in his footsteps. And he was my inspiration. Do I care that he's from India or China, or he's actually from Manitoba? But, that's fine. So...
sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has been a very interesting conversation in many ways, and I have to say, as somebody who has gone most of my life trying to make sure that I was elected for things on the basis of merit, not on the basis of where my parents were born or the color of my skin or the language that I may speak at home, I think it's really important that we frame the conversation in a way that that actually reminds people that the initial thinking around EDI was that we would ensure that we were getting the best of the best, and that in that we ensured that there were people that reflected the diversity of the country, not that you would hire people or put someone into a role because they checked off a box. And so I want to start, Professor Horstman, with asking you, your colleagues who may be considered diversity hires, do you think they produce less good scholarship than you?
I don't think so. I don't know that there would be any diversity hires that I would know of at this point. We've hired some, but in my department or people in my area, I'm not aware of any.
You would not say that, or would you say, I guess I want to make sure I don't put words in your mouth, would you say that the application of EDI policy has led to less qualified people hired, producing less good research?
That would be a logical conclusion.
No, but your view?
Yes, I think because if you reduce the applicant pool, necessarily.
Have you seen hires who are diversity hires around you or in the world in which you operate that have produced less good scholarship? And if so, can you give me an example?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I can't give you an example.
One of the things that I'm quite concerned about is that we should not be putting ourselves in a situation where anyone should think that less good research is being done, that science is somehow diminished as a result of people being hired who reflect diverse communities or populations. Would you say that that is what is happening?
Yes, if you are hiring not for merit, right? If you're hired, yeah.
You've just told me that you have not seen any examples where the quality of the work has been diminished as a result of EDI. So that's what I'm trying to understand. You've just said that
1% at a time,
You've
please.
just said that you have not seen examples where the quality of research is poorer by so-called diversity hires. But then you're saying that scholarship is diminished. So I guess I'm curious about how you square that circle.
Oh, just as I mentioned, if you reduce the applicant pool, so it's a statistical thing. If you have 100 applicants, and in our case, go down to less than one, we didn't have any applicants, are you going to get more is it likely, probabilistically, to get better applicants from 100 or one? It's a simple.
So I guess the question, I will go back to my original question then. Is the issue the principle of EDI, or is it the application of EDI in the current context?
I mean, the principle.
So the principle that we should broaden the pool as much as possible to have the most qualified people apply is problematic?
no, I like that, but that's not
So
EDI.
that was the intention of EDI when it in its existing framing.
I don't know if that's true.
So there's a study done by Northwestern University which looked at 90 studies across a number of countries that involved 174,000 applicants in academia to jobs and faculty in a number of Western countries. When names of racialized people or criteria that were able to assess diversity were put into the applications, applicants of color had to apply to 50% more jobs on the basis of equal credentials than non-diverse populations. When the study was, when the names were altered, the field was also equalized in terms of people being now, people of color now seeing that they were being called back at the same rate as people whose names were not racialized. Do you think that's a concern that we should be thinking about or looking at?
Sure, I suppose. I haven't seen this study, but I will say that's sure. But I know that studies like this. There's a very famous one with respect to applicants for a lab technician, where they use different names. I think it was more along the lines of female versus male. And they showed or claimed to show that women were discriminated against.
5 minutes. It was a 5 minute.
She said it was a 6-minute round.
No, it was a 5 minute.
Okay, apologize.
In an article that you published on the 11th of September, 55% of research chairs are inaccessible to white men, whereas the 33% for racialized individuals. So we're making some fairly heavy efforts to get the right color into the position.
The CRC Chairs program you're referring to has, again, it's really designed, there are tables that have quotas based on race, sex, a whole bunch of different factors, and there really seems to be no brakes on this process. I think in that case that you mentioned, I believe the target by 2029 was 22% racialized, which means non-white. That stands currently at 32%, I believe. A year or two ago, it was maybe 29. It just keeps going up. And I still see positions that are exclusionary of white men. Maybe you have an out if you claim some sexual difference or some queer identity, but really, it continues. This discriminatory exclusion continues.
Merci de confirmer tout ça. Professeur Kamapati.
Thank you, Professor Kamapati. Your opinion has been published widely, and you refused a grant when your team didn't have sufficient diversity. Do you think that they're less excellent because they're less diversified?
I'm happy to answer this question. Merci beaucoup for asking it. And to the broad question, I can say with absolute certainty, the practice of DEI ruins science, doesn't make it a little bit worse. It destroys competence and capability, and you take away positions for the more competent, and you give it to the less competent or to the incompetent. In sports, you never give positions based upon DEI. Why? Because you'll lose a game. And the game that we're trying to win here is the advancement of human civilization through science. It happens by the best people who are absolutely committed. My best PhD student was a white woman who's Swiss, and she's mini-me, and she's a Swiss woman. So it doesn't matter. She was the best person, and now she's a professor in Germany. But I've also seen women be given positions for which no men are allowed, and they're clearly less qualified. They got tenure and so forth, with clearly less qualified.
Yeah, please. Sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
So my question to you is, are we heading into being into a socialistic regime under the mandatory requirements of EDI being pushed by the left politics? So, and what are the dangers of that trend?
Thank you for your question. I can say absolutely true. What you've said, and as you've summarized, is 100% accurate. There has been institutional capture by leftist ideologues who represent maybe 10% of Canada, and probably 90% disagree. Not just conservatives, probably liberals, centrists, most people disagree. Most scientists disagree, but they don't want to say anything. They're afraid to say anything for losing funding, like myself or Jeff. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would say to the point that these programs fundamentally demoralize everyone. People who might go in, children say, I can't go into science. My sons say, I can't go into science because it's only for women. My sons say that, they're McGill students.
My next question is, we heard from across the panel that EDI in principle was meant to achieve different results. So if the EDI is not achieving the results that it was supposed to achieve, should we not stop it, in your opinion?
Absolutely, because I think, as the great economist Milton Friedman once said, you do not judge a policy based upon its intentions, you judge it based on its outcomes. And then you, the politicians, are empowered to make changes. And that's how democracy works. And that's how project management works. That's how science works. We get input and we change our mind.
Now we will end our panel with MP McKelvey for 2 minutes. MP McKelvey, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Horstman, if an institution recognizes the rich, diverse makeup of the Canadian population and the contribution of these communities to our history and the Canadian way of life, is that problematic?
I don't really understand what that means, to acknowledge a rich.
The value of the organization to embrace diversity, is that problematic?
Or if we're talking about a university, I think it is. I think a university should have a very clearly defined mandate. It's about pursuing knowledge, pursuing truth. I mean, why do you have to embrace political acknowledgements of different ethnic groups in your country? I mean, I don't think that's a particularly important thing for a university to do. And as we can see, it can move you off mission.
Dr. Kambathi, your thoughts on that?
Yes, I actually have a prepared statement because I anticipated this. Wonderful question. Point 3, my final point, stop social engineering in science. Science is not activism. Scientists are trained to test hypotheses and to discover, not to redistribute privilege. Whether that should even happen is another question. We're not communists, are we? Burdening research and ideological mandates distracts from discovery, erodes public trust. If science is left free, it benefits all of humanity, and these benefits will naturally flow to all people.
Would it surprise either of you that the Conservative Party's constitution recognizes the rich, diverse makeup of the Canadian population and the contribution of these communities to our history and the Canadian way of life, as a statement?
Would it surprise me? Not in the least, because I think in politics, you can talk about diversity, and in teaching, you can talk about diversity, maybe in police service, because you interact with humans. In science, no, I mean, to maybe some people who interact with humans, I don't. And all the people in my field, we're all machine people. Even the women are machine people. Everyone's a machine person. There's no person. So we're just there to do the work.
Is there interaction with humans?
Yes, go ahead.